Hey guys, it's Doug with North Table Mountain Christmas Lights, and I want to do a little behind the scenes video here on my Snowflake tower. The tower itself is loosely based on an ASAP pole and uses the 36-inch Living Light Show snowflakes from Biscoyo. It's 18 feet tall to the top, and the outer snowflakes are just under 3 feet off center from the main pole. And because of that, the size of the snowflakes and the kind of the distance off the center, it can create some good twisting force with the wind here. And I live in a really windy area, inside of a windy area, so we get lots of sustained winds here, 60 miles an hour plus, with 70 and 80, even 80 mile an hour gusts throughout the season. So that just requires everything I build here to be over-engineered to withstand the high winds we get. So I'll kind of go over some of the structure and how I have built this to withstand the winds. And this year we've had, I didn't quite get as strong winds as we typically get. Up to about probably 65 mile an hour was about the most we had with this tower in this year. But it was rock solid. It did not move even the slightest in that wind. So I have no doubt that this structure is going to be able to withstand the higher winds that we do typically get throughout the season. So in any event, now we'll kind of go into the little more detail on how I have this constructed. As I mentioned, it was based on an ASAP pole, and this pole was straight off my mega tree from last year. I just moved it here and built a little bit stronger pole for my mega tree this year. So instead of a portable hole, which a lot of ASAP poles do, this is just a concrete footing about 3 feet deep that goes into on the main ASAP pole. And as you'll see here, there is a secondary pole, and that just helps prevent everything from twisting in the wind. The guy wires will help as well, but this secondary pole certainly is a nice addition to that, and that also goes into a footing. I did not use the same size pipe on that just because I didn't think it was necessary. You know, the ASAP pole is 1.25 inches, and that is just a 1-inch electrical conduit for that, for the secondary pole. And the secondary pole just goes up to 10 feet. And at the 10-foot mark, I used the floor flange and just screwed that in there, and then I have two guy wires with the S-hooks in there that just keep that from rocking back and forth. I don't have as much stabilization on that as I do on my other poles, or on the other sections. And the snowflakes are kind of done in two different areas. So you have the lower three, which are mounted differently than the upper four. So the upper four are kind of done in this box structure with 1-inch square tubing, and the lower three are just done, that one's on the pole, and those two are on a 1-inch square tubing that runs horizontally between the two poles. Now, you'll see here I'm using muffler clamps that clamp onto the poles, and then the 1-inch tubing just goes into that. This one happens to have at the back here, there are some nuts that are just welded onto the frame, onto this 1-inch square tubing, and that's where that cinches into. Then on this side, I'm not using that, it just bolts all the way through. The reason I did the nuts on this side is because we have the snowflake here. So obviously I can't, or I don't want to put the bolts all the way through the snowflake. I want to do the nuts there to keep the snowflake pristine on that side. Now, the snowflake itself is zip tied to that piece, and that's not how I'm going to do it next year. That's going to change. So these lower three are zip tied to that horizontal piece. But what I really want to do, and this worked out great, is on these upper ones, there is a steel frame that I made behind it that's made from 1/2-inch square tubing. And you can kind of see here, it's bent. The horizontal pieces on the top and bottom are bent and angled to go around the pixels, and I'll post a photo of that with this because it's probably a little easier to see on here, but I had that fabricated and they work really well. And that frame is zip tied in several places to the Snowflake, and so that holds the Snowflake tight to the frame. And then there's that little plate, that little or a little plate in the center section, and there's a matching plate on the frame, and they just bolt through the two sections. So I just can unbolt the Snowflake and bolt it to the frame very quickly. A lot easier than I can with these, where that whole piece is one, so it's a little bit bigger for storage. So once I redo these three lower ones in the off season to the same plate design, that will definitely speed things up as far as assembly. Because in all this thing, the structure doesn't take that long to assemble, probably just over an hour to erect it up now that I have it built. Obviously, there was some trial and error with getting the initial design going, so that took quite a bit of time, but now that that's up, this thing goes together pretty quickly. So the upper section, how this is comprised, like I said, it's an ASAP pole, so that's just the inner section of the ASAP pole, the smaller section that goes up there. That's the 1-inch conduit. And that is attached to a steel Biscoyo topper. That's the 32-string topper. So I wanted a nice rigid top piece on it that I could bolt the assembly to. And so the top section of horizontal tubing is 1-inch square tubing, and that is a pretty thick wall that I'm using for the top or that top horizontal and that horizontal piece. All the other pieces are using a thinner wall of 1-inch tubing. So the top piece and that bottom horizontal piece use a 1/8-inch wall on the tubing. So it's a very stout, very stiff piece, and then all the other pieces of 1-inch tubing on the verticals, and then those horizontals for those snowflakes there, those are all 0.065 walls, so the thinnest wall I could get. And I just got those at a local metal supply shop. They cut them to length for me, and then most of those just got bolted. I drilled, marked and drilled all the hole locations, and a few things had to get welded, such as on these vertical pieces. So if you notice on the vertical piece that goes in there, and I'll see if I can zoom in a little bit, they have kind of like a little T there at the top. It's just a little plate, probably about 3/16 thick steel plate that's welded onto the end that bolts to the structure, and same thing right there, that just bolts to the structure. And that helps when, the reason why I have those vertical pieces there is obviously, one, it helps with mounting that one snowflake there on the right, but the main reason is for tension on the guy wires. So if I'm tensioning those guy wires and pulling down, that was causing the top piece to bend down considerably before I put those in place. Initially I didn't have them there on the design, and when I was trying to put tension on the guy wires, everything was bowing down considerably. So that's where I put that box structure in, and that locks those 4 snowflakes kind of together, and really gets a very strong design that allows you to stabilize it with the guy wires very well. So you can see that top snowflake there on the upper left. That one just bolts directly into that horizontal cross member at the top. And the 2 that are in the center, they just bolt with muffler clamps to that center pole. So that's a very straightforward how they go in. When I first put it up, I put all the snowflakes on when it's at that 10-foot level. So I'll do that first snowflake on the left, I'll put that up, then I'll crank the pole up about 2 feet, and I'll put that next one on the center, and then I'll crank it up to the full height, put the all the guy wires on and stabilize it, and then I'll put that snowflake on the 3rd snowflake there, and that 4th snowflake on at that point. So I'm really only up at the ladder about 10 feet putting those up before I crank everything up to the full height. And then these just, like I said, on the lower ones, once I get that frame that I'm going to do for next year, they will just bolt in place very easily. So I'll still put those horizontal pieces in first, and then the snowflakes will bolt in, and that will really tie that structure together. Now as far as guy wires on it, at the center section at the top, I have 3 guy wires that go into that steel topper, and I also have 3 wires that go into the ASAP pole right before the 10-foot mark. So right at the top of the first pole, I have those 3 guy wires in there. And then at the very top, I have 2 guy wires on either side at the top of the horizontal piece. So 2 on that side and 2 on that side, and that really helps stabilize for the twisting force of the wind. And these guy wires, the ones off the lower section here, so these lower 3, they all go in to the spiral anchors. So they are the 16-inch spiral anchors that go into the ground, and I'm using S-hooks and a turnbuckle there to help tension it, and they go right into those spiral anchors. All the other ones that go on the upper section, that's going to carry a little bit more wind force, what I use on those are 30-inch auger style anchors. So these anchors, and you can see on this one I doubled it up. I have 2 from the upper section on here, but that's a 30-inch anchor, goes down, and they were a pain in the butt to put in the ground because I have a lot of rocks here, so I was always hitting the rock, then having to find a new hole location and try again, and it took hours to get all those in and find a location where they would go all the way down. But there they are, 30 inches. I'm not going to touch them. They're going to stay in the ground all year. And again, the turnbuckles, S-hooks, that all connect that together. And with that, everything is very stable. And this structure, like I said, has withstand the wind very well. I'm not really going to change anything on it for next year. I think it will work out just fine the way it is. I'm just going to make certain I label all these guy wires because I've had to customize a few different lengths on them, so I'll make sure they're all labeled so it makes it easier to put together and assemble. I did run my control box for it controls not just the tower but everything on this side of the driveway that I have here, and there'll be room to grow. I'm going to add a lot more stuff here this next year, and that'll all be controlled in this box. And in here is 2 power supplies, 2 Meanwhile LRS power supplies, and F16 V2, Raspberry Pi, let's see, that one's a Pi 2, and my temperature sensor that I put on everything that controls the fan, which is now cycling on and off right now because this gets a lot of southern exposure, so this box gets pretty warm. Even on a day like today where the temperature's only in the mid-40s, this box is up in the 90s, so that fan is cycling on and off. But that's really it here. If there's anything else on here that you have any questions on, feel free to post and ask. Like I said, this is just a standard ASAP pole. I'm using a 600-pound winch, and this is what I had used on my Megatree last year. And one other thing here, just a note, and I've had issues on my ASAP pole on the Megatree, and actually it's probably easier if I show you on the Megatree, and I'm making this change next year, but the push pole, which on the ASAP design uses 1-inch EMT, is I have issues on this with, and it's kind of hard to see here, rabbit just lives under my Megatree. That thing needs to go away, but at least he hasn't chewed on my wires this year. But I'm having a lot of stress here on this push pole, and I've had to move this around a bit. You can see on this side how bowed out that is, and I'm not even putting that much tension on it. So it's just too much stress on the thin walls on the EMT conduit. So I went to a much thicker conduit on this one over here on the Snowflake tower. I went to, I believe, off the top of my head, that was, is it 1-inch or 3/4-inch conduit? I can't recall on here. That looks like 3/4-inch conduit that's on there, and then I put an extra coupler on there and sanded that down to give a little more strength on the push pole. And so that's worked out well, and I'm going to make that change to the Megatree next year. And it looks like I have more Christmas stuff here from clearance from Menards, so thank you, UPS. Anyhow, that's all. If you have any questions, let me know.